Welcome to a new video! Today I'm going to share with you my Darklord deck profile. Now I don't really have any much else to say for the start of this video unlike any others, so we're going to jump right into the video after I'm going to remind you the usual thing that if you want to help the channel, give a like, give your comment, or just subscribe to the channel, which is really helping out. Please do that, I muchly appreciate it, and all of your support is very much welcome. It's really encouraged me to create more awesome videos, and I'm really happy to see that there are a lot of people who enjoy them. But without further ado, and without wasting any more time on sentimental stuff, let's jump right into the list itself, I guess. Alright, so jumping right into the Darklord deck itself, we're going to start things with the 5 monsters, I guess, in names that share the same following effect, which are the 3 copies of Ixchel, the double copies of Nastin, or Nasty if you're nasty, I guess, 1 copy of Teokatlapoka, 1 copy of Nurgle, and 1 copy of Imduk. Now I said 5 cards in names, technically I'm running 8, but that's beside the point. The following effect that they share, however, is, well, as a quick effect, you pay 1,000 life points, you target a Darklord spell or trap in the graveyard, you apply his effect, and then you shuffle it back into the deck. Now this effect is actually pretty good, because it's allowing you to basically activate multiple names of the same spell or trap multiple times per turn as much as you have them in the graveyard. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is pretty much in the same way works as Verde Anaconda, that even if you kind of just, you know, apply the effect, because you apply the effect and you pay the 1,000 life points as the cost, you don't really get the restrictions. Because in the case of, for example, with Verde Anaconda, when you're using, let's say, Red Eyes Fusion, right? You don't have the so-called restriction that you cannot normal summon or special summon for the turn you activate this effect, even though you summon a Dragoon out of your deck using the Red Eyes Fusion, because the cost that you paid is the 2,000 life points. So this is kind of like in the same way. So you don't really have the restrictions, you just have the effect itself. And that, for example, can work if you have 2 copies of Banishment in your graveyard. If you have 2 of these and you have 2 Darklord monsters with different names, even if you activate Banishment in your hand, you basically still able to activate the 2 effects in the graveyard by shuffling back into the deck, because these are count for the cost to pay the 1,000 life points and count for their own effects. So that's how that kind of works, so I just want to mention that. And also, again, with traps that do have the effect, all of them, to send a Darklord monster from your hand or face up from the field to the graveyard will not require that cost, because the cost that you're paying is, well, you know, paying the 1,000 life points before. So that's how that works specifically, and I want to stop on this for a second because, yeah, this is kind of like the main gimmick for the archetype. So do understand that this is kind of like in the same principle as Verde Anaconda, that you're paying 1,000 life points for the cost. Just going to say that right now for the final time, just for you to understand. But for the case of their individual effects, well, you have 3 Ixchel, which is the cornerstone, I guess. She's allowing you, as a Destiny draw-like monster, discard herself and discard another Darklord card, and then draw 2 cards. Very awesome. Wish it wasn't a harder once per turn, and it was kind of like pantheism, I guess. But I guess that could have been a little bit too overpowered. But still, this deck needed a little bit of support, so I would have loved that. In the case of Nastin, this guy is allowing you to do the following. You discard 2 Darklord cards from your hand, and then you special summon it out of your hand. Now, it is a little bit of a steep cost, so that's why I only run 2, because you do want to see it sometimes, because it does allow you to unclog your hand from your traps or your spells if you already use 1 per turn, and then just like apply the effect immediately if you need to, so that's actually pretty cool. And it's also just a free body on board. It is, like I said, again, a steep cost to play 2 cards, but sometimes you need to do that, so that's why I'm okay with that. In the case of Teokatlapoka, if your Darklord monster will be destroyed by battle by card effect, you get to discard them from your hand instead. So that's kind of like a nice mini protection. Sometimes you do need that, so that's why I like to run the 1 and search it if I need to. In the case of Nurgle, he just give your fairy monsters piercing damage. In the case of Imduk, he's a weird kind of recovery card, which is allowing you to discard himself and another Darklord card, and then target any Darklord card in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. Which is kind of cool. Again, I feel like just like Nastin, this is a little bit of way too much, what do I call it, cost, but it is what it is, and, you know, you have to learn to live with that. But in the case of all of these, very, very great. Now, I did see some people cutting cutting this and cutting one copy of this and only playing one, because they going with the principle that you can search it. But I actually like the 2 copies of Nastin and Teotihuacan just for the additional name to activate the spell and traps in the graveyard. But if you want specifically, you could cut these 2 and then just play additional, I say, power spells or stuff like that, because playing like this kind of limiting you for power spells, which we'll get to those. And we're also getting to the power spells that you can play instead of what I'm playing when we'll get to the spells. But the point is, this is kind of like the lineup of Darklord monsters that you want to run traditionally. And then in the case of the other Darklord monsters that don't share this effect, we have 3 copies of Supervia, 3 copies of Indulged, 1 copy of Morningstar, 1 copy of Zerato, and then 1 copy of Ukabak. Now, all of these monsters, in my opinion, are just important to run at least at 1 copy with these 3. And these, I think, should be run at 3 copies each because they're very, very important. Supervia is basically your monster reborn. If it gets summoned, you get to target 1 fairy monster in your graveyard, except itself, and special summon it. So it can be any fairy, not just a Darklord monster. And it can also revive Link monsters because, mostly I would say right now, this is the only way that you are able to revive your Link monster Condemned Darklord, which we'll get to it in the extra deck, because the rest of your spells and traps or whatever just revive them in defense position, but, you know, it is what it is. So I'm just going to say right now, this is really good. But I should mention one thing, that this card is a 1 effect. Now, why is that important? Well, because of it being a 1 effect, when you activate the Monster Reborn-like effect with the, let's say, X-Shell as a quick effect, right? You shuffle this back into the deck, this will miss timing. So I'm going to say this right now, that this will miss timing. So if you are kind of like wondering why you're playing and you're done getting a monster once you activate Contact in the grave with the effect of a Darklord monster, this is missing timing because it's a 1 effect. Just going to throw that out there. In the case of Indulged, she's a very, very good monster. We got her in Rise of the Duelist, and she's really, really awesome because she give the deck the much-needed normal summon, which is basically on normal or special summon, you get to add, or should I say, pick 2 Darklord monsters from your deck, give 1 of them for your opponent, and then add 1 of them to your hand. They cannot be Indulged Darklord, and they have to be different level. That's kind of like the restriction. And then the other last restriction is that she locks you to fairy effects for the rest of the turn. So that's a little bit of a bummer on that, but it should be mentioned that you do have a trap that steals stuff, so it's not the end of the world even if you give your opponent a monster. Plus, you can get rid of something out of your deck and just get it to your graveyard if you need to after you attack over it, or give them something small, which is insignificant. And just really, really good because you're also able to kind of like take cards out of your deck, which is pretty, pretty cool. So I like this card quite a bit. I think this card is very, very important. In the case of these 3 cards, well, these 3 are actually kind of interesting. They're more of like one-offs because they're not like the best thing around, but they're still important. Morningstar, you cannot special summon it, but you can tribute summon it, and if you tribute summon it, you get to special summon many Darklord's monsters from your deck that you can, up to the number of monsters that your opponent controls. So basically, you get to, like, let's say your opponent have 2 monsters and you only have the 1, you get to special summon a Darklord monster from your deck. If your opponent have 5 monsters and you have the 1, you get to special summon 4 Darklord monsters from your deck. So that's actually really, really cool, and also can special summon it from the hand, but mostly, let's be honest, you get to special summon from the deck. The other effect is that if you control another Darklord monster, this, your opponent cannot target this card with effect, and then once per turn, you can send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard, up to the number of Darklord monsters you control, and get 500 life points for each Darklord card sent. So this is kind of like an interesting way that was back in the day before we got all of the new support, that kind of like was your way to kind of like refill life points and just fill your graveyard, but unfortunately wasn't really consistent. Still, very, very important card because of the fusion monster, which is hint, we'll get to the extra deck, because this one is one of its materials, or should I say, like, if you use it as a material, it's just giving the additional, like, the fusion monster additional effect. Zerato is kind of like, if you know Archlord Christia, the same thing, but for him, it's not a special summon, it's a tribute summon for 1 monster, if you have 4 dark monsters with different name in the graveyard, but you get the ability to send 1 dark monster from your hand, and then he's a Regeki, so that's pretty good. And then Ukabak is just, Foolish Burial, I guess. for any Darklord card. It's more here as like to serve as your normal summon if you haven't normal summoned, because you don't really use your normal summon for the most part, except for anything but Indulge, so it's kind of like the fourth normal summon if you need it. But honestly, I'm just going to say it doesn't come close to Indulge. Just going to say this right now, I don't think it's come any close to Indulge, because Indulge just gave the deck so much power. But that's pretty much does it for the Darklord monsters. A little bit of a long explanation because I felt like it was necessary. But now for the rest of the monsters: 2 copies of Archlord Christia, 3 copies of Gamma, and then the 1 copy of Driver. I feel like these are just like self-explanatory. Gamma and Driver, you need some kind of form of interruption in this deck. You have so many cards that are requiring you to draw before you even have a monster, so these are perfect. You can play other hand traps as well. Like I said, you could cut 1 Nastent and cut the Teokatlapoka and play more, but I felt like these just do the job that they need to do for the most part. I ran other things in the side deck, but I really like these. In the case of Archlord Christia, well, that is pretty obvious. She's level 8, she's a fairy, she's worked perfectly in this deck, and she's just the free special summon that you have in your side of the field that kind of like lock your opponent out of everything, which is pretty stupid. You can summon it either with Superia or with her own effect, so that's actually really powerful, and you only need to run 2 because you don't want to see it way too much. But that's pretty much does it for the monsters. Now we'll move on into the spells. And for the spells, actually, I'm going to skip really quickly because there's not really a whole lot of things to explain. We have 3 copies of Banishment and 3 copies of Contact. I don't need to explain these way too much. Reinforcement of the Army, and Monster Reborn. In defense position, not targeting Monster Reborn, by the way. But the point is, Monster Reborn reinforces the army. Nothing really much to explain on these. These are the cards that you want to run. These are the only spells, unfortunately. I wish there was another more that was really good. But they're still very important cards, and you have to run these at 3 because they're consistency cards, and you want to see them. And then for the rest of the spells, I only run draw spells because that's the only space I have for them left, which are 3 Allure Darkness, 3 Trade In, and then the 1 copy of Upstart Goblin. These can change and vary depending on what you want specifically. I've seen some people run 2 copies of Trade In, and then instead of the Upstart Goblin and the 3rd Trade In, you run 2 copies of Pot Desires. You can also run, instead of this, a Reasoning. You can also run, like I said, instead of like the what I call it, Cypherame Lord, Cypherame, and then the Driver, and then Teokatlapoka, and then that 1 Nastent. Like I said, you have 6 slots that you can just like play around things that you feel like it, and you can just like run things like Foolish Burial Goods, Monster Reborn, Reasoning, Pot of Desires, play whatever you want to. I just felt like the more important things is draw cards, because this deck just required to draw cards. If you don't draw the cards that you need, or you just like, go deep into your deck and feel a graveyard, you cannot really do anything. So that's why specifically I felt like these are the more important cards. I wanted to run Monster Reborn instead, but I felt like the 39 deck consistency is actually really important in this deck. As much as like the monster effects are really good, if you don't get your setup, you cannot really play. So that's why I decided to go with that lineup. But again, you can change this how you want to. And then for the traps, I run 1 copy of each of the good traps. There is a 5th one, which is pretty terrible, but you don't really want to run it. These are the important ones that you want to run. I run 1 of each. Again, you can side these depend on the game. You want to start game 1 with all of them, and then in game 2 and 3, you just side things that depending on the matchup. So sometimes these traps are not that good, and you want to have something else. Rebellion is probably my favorite. This one is, all of them, like I said, share the fact that you need to send a Darklord from your hand or field to the graveyard to activate, so that's why you want them in the graveyard most of the time. But the point is that this one is a non-targeting destruction card, so you get to destroy a card on the field. It doesn't target, which is pretty good. In the case of enchantment, this is a monster of steel for the rest of the turn, which is kind of cool. Again, I believe it doesn't target, which is really awesome, and it's really nice, and that's why, like I said, Indulge is not really that bad, because you're able to sometimes steal your own monster back and then make link plays with it. The Sanctified Darklord is allowing you to get the effect of 1 effect monster on the field. Again, doesn't target, really good, so it's giving you that, and it's also giving you life point equal to its attack, so that's also, again, really good, another way to gain life points. And then Uprising is your fusion spell. You basically do that, and then you get life points equal to the attack of the monsters that you send for the cost. This is also allowing you to fusion summon any dark monsters that you wanted, so that's why I'm also running Starving Venom in the extra deck. But mostly I'm running Starving Venom for the Super Poly targets, which I have, playing Super Poly in the side deck. But again, Uprising is a card that you can play. You can take it out, like I said, in game 2 and 3. But I think these cards are very, very important, and you just want to run them. And then for the extra deck, which is the next section we're going to do, obviously, we're going to start with the 1 copy of the first Darklord and only 2 copies, or should I say only 1 copy of him and then double copies of Condemned. Now, the first Darklord, originally I run 2, but I came more and more to the situations that I just felt like it doesn't really comes up to run more than 1. Because you don't really go into more than 1 Uprising, and because he does require you to have 3 fairy monsters to summon him, so that's a very, very high cost. Secondly, most of the time you're trying to summon him with Morningstar, because if you summon him with Morningstar, you get to apply the effect of popping the entire field to your opponent, which is pretty awesome. But you can only use either of the effects per turn, so if you use that effect, you cannot use the secondary effect, which is a quick effect, to give you to pay 1,000 life points to revive a fairy from your graveyard, which in this particular one effect, you don't miss the effect with Suburbia. I also checked that, so that's kind of cool. But the point is that this guy is pretty awesome. But, like I said, the problem with him is that he's pretty expensive to summon. But in the case of Condemned, this is the more important one. This one required 2 fairy monsters. She has 3 awesome effects, which is the first one. You get to tribute fairy monsters by banishing 2, like the big ones. Like, let's say you have the, Morningstar in your hand, and then you're trying to summon it. You get to banish 2 fairy monsters from your graveyard instead of tributing. So that's actually really good. I kind of got stopped on there for a second, but I just wanted to kind of confirm 100% that I'm reading the effect correctly. And then the effect that mostly matters is that she's able to give you the effect to discard a card, add a Darklord card from your deck to your hand, or send it to the graveyard, or should I say Darklord monster, so she's able to kind of give you whatever you wanted to your hand. And the end phase effect, she's allowing you to gain 1,000, or should I say 500 life points for each fairy monster on the field, including yourself. So that's actually kind of good. And these kind of what they do. Again, Condemned I think is more important, but the first is still very good. And then for the rest of the extra deck, 1 copy of Starving Venom Fusion Dragon for the Super Poly target, 1 Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon, and then 1 copy of Cyframe Lord Omega. These are kind of the monsters that I decide to go with. The rest of the extra can just basically change depending on what you find specifically to be useful. These are what I found to be useful. This one could be summoned with Uprising, and secondly is a Super Poly target. These 2 are for my Omega targets. There are some turns that I find myself with 2 Gammas, or should I say Gammas targets. Sometimes that I find myself with 2 Gammas, right? So I can activate one with an effect, summon this, then banish it and banish a card out of my opponent's hand, and if they're trying to do that again, I summon Chaos Ruler, which is amazing because this card just is the heavy punish for the deck, because if they're giving you this and your effect go off, you're I wouldn't say winning, but you're in a very good position because you're able to Foolish Barrel the card that you want to, and add one of the top 5 cards from your deck to your hand, which is freaking awesome. So you're able to add whatever you need to, and it's a monster reborn by itself, so you're able to kind of get him back. So this card is a level 8, it works really well in the deck, and that's why I like to run this card. You 100% don't need to run it, but I just really like the card. And that does it for those. And then for the Xyz, I run a 1 copy of Photon Lord, 1 copy of Draglubian, 38 and 101, or should I say 101, 100. These are kind of self-explanatory. I should mention that if you play Indulge, you cannot use Draglubian effect to basically summon, so do keep that in mind again. But these are kind of the Xyz that I decided to go with. The rank 8s I felt the more necessary ones, because these are the ones that you're going to go into the most. The rest of the levels are not frequent enough to run more. Now, of course, these can change depending on your budget or anything, but I felt these just do the best effects that you want to. Monster Negate, the OTK package, and then also Spell and Trap Negate. So that's, or should I say Spell Negate, so that's actually pretty good. And then for the rest of the links, I like to run 1 copy of the Mirage Lights, 1 copy of Masquerena, Phoenix, Unicorn, Appaloosa. These are kind of the link monsters that I like to run. Masquerena is a little bit debatable for me. I'm not really 100% sure that I like her in this list because I'm not really sure I need her. But sometimes you do on 3 Darklord monsters not able to extend, so you make 2 into Masquerena, and the third one will be Unicorn during the opponent's turn, and then you get the ability to discard a card which might want to, and then spin a card which is pretty good. Appaloosa, you kind of like able in your good hands to make this quite easily, so that's a pretty nice for that. And then Mirage Lights is for the bad hands. If you're able to get 2 monsters on the board and not doing anything, you're still able to make this, and this is still a negate, so that's actually pretty good. Unfortunately, you're not able to get his search effect ever, but you know, it is what it is. But that's pretty much does it for my Darklord list. Honestly, again, I'm sorry that it took a lot of time to explain, but these cards need a lot of explanation in my opinion, because these guys are just, that's how they work. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this list, and we're going to jump right into, without any more waste, into the side decks that I run specifically, and closing off the video. Alright, so moving into the side deck. Now, side deck, I'm going to say right now, is up to personal preference, and it's basically depending on your pocket meta and where you are around at. So if specifically there is something here that you don't really like and you like to run something else, just run that. This is specifically what I'm finding to be useful for my pocket meta and what I'm facing, and again, change things depending on what you want. But for what I want specifically is basically to run the following. 3 copies of Nib, 3 copies of Droll, 3 copies of Artifact Lancia, 3 copies of Dark Ruler, and 3 copies of Super Poly. These are kind of like the matchups that I'm kind of like facing. Cards that are good against these matchups are most of the things that I'm facing right now, and that's why I decided to go with these. Again, change things if you want to. If you see more back row heavy decks, run also Cosmic Cyclone and what I call Harpy Feather Duster. But these are cards that I own that I also kind of like have in their high impact in my pocket meta. So this is what I like to go with. But again, depending on what you want specifically. But then for the closing part of the video, which is the part that you get to choose what you're going to see next week, I have 3 returning decks, which are the 3 choices that weren't choice like Swix, which are Fluffles, I believe Shiranuis, and the third one is Lightsworns. And then the 4th option, which is the new one, which is the one that I actually want to do again pretty soon, regardless, is a Bloodluster Soldier. Now, Bloodluster Soldier, I really like it, and I might want to take another spin regardless, we'll see, but it's a list that I basically going to present for you for my 4th option. But that's pretty much does it for the video, and does it for the deck profile as a whole. I know I explained so much a little bit in the deck profile, or should I say explained a lot, but that's the person I am. So if you're new to this channel, get used to that. This is what I do. You can skip things if you like to, but I like to give things to detail because I know that there are some people who don't really know how to play a certain deck, but they want to play that. So if you don't, like, only interested in the list, you can always just like skip to the side and just see what's in there. So just going to say that right now for people who are new here. But basically, that's pretty much it. So if you enjoyed the video, please give a like and also subscribe to the channel because it really helps a lot. And yes, creativity is the key in this game. Have a good day, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.